Hi, and welcome back to another AI in 5. As always, I'm your host, Simon Chris. Joining me today is Rasmus Hauch. He's the CTO of Boost AI based in Copenhagen. And we're going to be talking about transparency and explainability in AI. Hey, Rasmus, welcome to AI in 5. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Simon.
Now, we've only got 5 minutes. We're going to jump right in. Here in Australia, the Australian federal government has just mandated that by the 28th of February, every government department must produce a transparency statement. So it's the government trying to push their own people from kind of black box to glass box. Is that a reasonable description? I mean, what do you think about transparency and transparency statements?
Well, I think there's a lot of terms in responsible AI, right? There's like fairness, privacy, and a lot of other things. But I really think that transparency is sort of at the foundation of where you need to go as a company and as a person when it comes to AI. Because if you don't have transparency, well, then you don't really know whether you are responsible, whether you are fair, whether you are, in fact, doing all the privacy things that you need to. So I think that's really what comes first. Now, transparency is for me all about understanding. One thing is that you provide an input and you get an output, but what happens, behind or behind the scene while that happens, right? So if you don't have that input, well, then you don't really know what you're really doing, right? So it's all about having that, because once you have transparency, well, then you can also have control, right? You can start to modify and you can start to change the inputs and the outputs.
So is that intrinsically linked then to explainability? Like, is that a part of it? Do you see that as a separate thing?
So explainability is actually a part of it, right? Because explainability you can have multiple levels of explainability. So you can have what I call local explainability, which is like, well, fine, I give some input and then I get some output and then I get a sort of an explainer that tells a bit about why that particular decision or output was being generated. But you can also have a global explainability, which is like, well, what kind of data sets were this model built on? How was this trained? What kind of metrics were generated throughout the training process? So I think there's multiple levels of explainability, and
Yeah.
you probably need them all in some sense, right? And if you see, the LLMs out there and the way that they've been trained, there's not a lot of transparency in the world of
There's
LLMs today.
not. Yeah,
So
and it's interesting because there's kind of transparency for a product as built, and then there's transparency or explainability around the tool as used, right? Because you could build a great tool
yeah.
that's very fair and equitable, but it couldn't be used in a bad way. We've seen this with social media, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, right. And I think it's definitely something to be wary about. I see the whole space turning into more and more a political space when it comes to, building the big LLMs. Now we've seen DeepSeek. I'm sure you've talked about that in other sessions, and I think that's part of a political power struggle as well, right? Which can also, I think, will evolve into multiple different parts, right? Because, there's the consumer-facing LLMs, then you have the domain-specific LLMs, and then you have the the open source world that is sort of where everybody builds on top of each other's, shoulders all the time, right? So the question is, where will it go, right? And I think there's going to be a different variety of sort of offerings out there throughout the next couple of years in all of these spaces, basically.
So we're at time, but
Yeah.
and look, we could go on for another hour. This is great. I always love to ask everybody, just in 30 seconds, what would be your one best bit of advice for an organization that was just starting their AI journey?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Simon. So I think that I think the first step obviously is, when working with AI, get somebody that knows their fields. And I like to talk about this T profile because one of the biggest, I think challenges I see companies have when working with AI is maybe they know, quite a bit about, ChatGPT and other things like that. But when it comes down to, building it, there's a lot of foundational IT principles and skills that you need to have. So,
Rasmus, this has been a great AI in 5. Thanks so much for being a part of it.
no worries, Simon. Thank you very much for having me. So I'm looking forward to the next time.